We often talk about history in terms of, the loud people, the conquerors, the revolutionaries, the people who break things.
Right. Generals who smashed armies, politicians who dismantled empires.
We're just naturally drawn to the noise.
Of course. It's human nature. If something explodes, you look at it.
Exactly. But today, I want to look at a figure who was arguably quieter than a librarian, but who acted as this massive, almost invisible bridge between two completely different eras of human thought.
He really did.
We're talking about the connective tissue that links the, let's say, rigorous logic of ancient Greece, Plato, and Aristotle to the spiritual, religious intensity of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and even beyond that.
It's a fascinating position he holds because without him, that whole transition from what we think of as reason to faith in the West, it just looks completely different.
And right there, in the middle of it all, standing on that bridge, is a man named Plotinus.
Plotinus, the founder of what we now call Neoplatonism. Although, we should probably clarify right out of the gate, he never would have used that word.
He wouldn't have called himself a Neoplatonist.
No, not at all. He didn't think he was inventing anything neo or new. He just thought he was being a good Platonist, reading the old texts correctly.
But he wasn't just dusting off old scrolls. I mean, this is a guy with a serious edge. Here's the hook that really got me interested. We are talking about a philosopher who was so dismissive of the physical world, so completely over the concept of having a body, that when his students begged to have his portrait painted, he actually got angry.
He did. It's a famous anecdote. He flat out refused to sit for a painter.
Which is, you have to admit, a terrible marketing strategy for a public figure.
Oh, terrible. But his reasoning was perfectly consistent with his philosophy. He asked them, is it not enough to carry around this image in which nature has enclosed us?
And then the killer line.
Must you also leave behind an image of the image?
An image of the image. That right there is the key phrase for understanding him.
It is. He saw his physical body as a shadow, a mere mimicry of his true self. So in his mind, painting a portrait of his face was like taking a photograph of a costume. It just wasn't him.
So our mission today is to explore this enigma. We're going to look at a man born in Egypt in the 3rd century who ended up changing how humanity thinks about the soul, the intellect, and this huge concept of the one. And maybe most importantly for us listening today, we're going to look at his radical ideas about happiness. Because for Plotinus, happiness had absolutely nothing to do with what was happening to you and everything to do with what was happening in you.
It's a radically empowering philosophy, it really is, especially when you understand the architecture of reality he built to support it. But it does require you to rethink what you consider real.
Okay, so we have a stack of sources here. We're pulling heavily from the detailed biography left by his student Porphyry.
Porphyry is key.
Right, and also the Enneads, which is his major work, and of course modern scholarship on that whole transition from the classical world to late antiquity.
And we really do have to rely on Porphyry here. Without him, Plotinus would just be a ghost.
So let's jump into section 1, the reluctant biography. And reluctant really is the perfect word.
It absolutely is. I mean, usually when you study a historical figure, you start with the basics. Birth date, parents, hometown. With Plotinus, it's just a mystery box.
We don't even know his birthday.
We don't. We have to do some math to figure it out. We know he died in 270 CE, and Porphyry tells us he was about 66. So we place his birth around 204 or 205 CE, and he was likely born in Lycopolis, Egypt.
So is he Egyptian?
Geographically, yes, but culturally, he was entirely Greek.
Oh, okay.
His native language was Greek. He was educated in the Greek classics. And historians have argued for centuries about whether his family was, Hellenized Egyptian or Roman settlers or Greek immigrants. But honestly, Plotinus would probably be so annoyed that we're even talking about this.
He'd be rolling his eyes from the great beyond.
He would. To him, discussing his ancestry or his race was a complete waste of time. It was like discussing the cage you're trapped in rather than the person inside it. Porphyry explicitly says Plotinus never, ever discussed his parents, his race, or his childhood.
Because of that inherent distrust of materiality.
Exactly. He viewed the physical body as a mimicry. So if you identify with your history or your genetics or where you were born, you're identifying with the shadow. He wanted to identify with the light that casts the shadow.
But his students were clever, right? They did manage to get that portrait anyway.
They did. This guy, Criterius, was one of the most famous painters of the time. Porphyry couldn't get Plotinus to sit, so he just invited Criterius to the open lectures.
Just to come and hang out.
Yeah, the painter would sit there in the audience, staring intently at Plotinus, memorizing his features, the way the light hit his nose, the set of his jaw. Then he'd rush home and sketch from memory.
That's basically the first unauthorized paparazzi shot in philosophy.
It is, essentially. And he eventually produced a portrait that Porphyry said was an excellent likeness, so we do know what he looked like, despite his best efforts to remain an image of an image.
Now, despite this sort of grumpy attitude toward his own history, the sources say he wasn't a hermit, right? I kind of picture a guy like this living in a cave, yelling at clouds.
Not at all, and that's the paradox. Despite dismissing the physical world as an illusion or a shadow, his social and moral life was, by all accounts, of the highest standard. He lived in Rome, he was surrounded by people.
And he was actually a caregiver.
He was a very prested one. Wealthy Romans who were dying would leave their children in his care, trusting him to manage their estates and their education. Porphyry tells us his house was full of young boys and maidens.
That is just a fascinating contradiction. This world is a shadow, but listen, kids, I'm going to make sure you get a good education and your inheritance is managed properly.
It shows that his philosophy wasn't about being cruel or indifferent. It was more like you could participate in the play of life with total integrity, even if you knew it was just a play.
Okay, let's talk about his search for wisdom. Because he didn't start this philosophy gig straight out of the cradle.
No, he was a late bloomer by ancient standards. He didn't take up the serious study of philosophy until he was 28.
Which is like starting your tech startup at 50 today, basically.
In the ancient world, yes. He traveled to Alexandria, which at the time was the intellectual capital of the world. It was the place where everything converged: Greek, Jewish, Egyptian, Persian thought. It was all there.
And he was picky.
Extremely. He went from teacher to teacher, leaving all of them dissatisfied. He was actually falling into a depression about it. He told a friend he was looking for something he couldn't find, a rigorous system that also touched the divine.
Okay.
Finally, the friend told him to go check out this self-taught philosopher named Ammonius Saccas.
The sap porter.
Right. Ammonius had been a laborer, a porter, before turning to philosophy. Plotinus walks in, hears Ammonius speak, and immediately declares to his friend, "This is the man I was looking for."
I love that moment. It's that resonance. You know, when you're searching for a sound you can't quite hear, and then someone plays the note, and it just clicks.
And he stayed with Ammonius for 11 years.
11 years.
We don't know exactly what Ammonius taught because, a bit like Socrates, he didn't write anything down. But it clearly formed the bedrock of Plotinus's thought, this blend of Plato with a very high spiritual drive.
But then, Plotinus gets the itch. He's 38 years old now. He's mastered what Alexandria has to offer. And he decides he wants to go to the source of Eastern wisdom.
He wants to study Persian and Indian philosophy.
This is where the biography suddenly turns into an action movie for a minute.
It really does.
He doesn't just, buy a ticket to India.
No, you couldn't. At that time, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire were enemies. You couldn't just cross the border as a tourist philosopher. So, to get access to the wisdom of the Magi and the Brahmins, Plotinus does something drastic.
He enlists.
He enlists in the Roman army.
I just have this mental image of him in the back of the legion formation, ignoring the spear drills and trying to conjugate Sanskrit verbs in his head.
It was an incredibly risky move. The emperor at the time, Gordian III, was launching a massive campaign to march on Persia. So Plotinus, the mystic philosopher who thinks the body is a shadow, puts on armor and marches into war.
And the outcome?
A total disaster. The campaign failed miserably. Emperor Gordian III was killed, either in battle or, as some accounts suggest, murdered by his own troops. The Roman army just fell apart in Mesopotamia.
So now Plotinus is stuck. He's in hostile territory with no emperor and no army.
Completely abandoned in a hostile land. He had to flee for his life. He barely escaped and made his way to Antioch. He never made it to India.
The irony is just so rich. He joins the army just to get a library card in Persia and ends up running for his life in a failed war.
But he survived, and at the age of 40, he finally settled in Rome. And this is where the deep dive into his actual work really begins. Rome becomes his base for the rest of his life.
And he attracts quite a crew there. It wasn't just other philosophers, was it?
No, not at all. It was a very diverse group. He had senators attending his lectures, he had doctors, poets, and he had women, which is definitely worth noting for the time period, specifically a woman named Jamina and her daughter. He actually lived in their house.
It sounds like a real salon,
Yeah.
a high-intellect salon right in the middle of Rome.
It was, and he even had these, well, you could call them political philosophical ambitions. He tried to convince the Emperor Gallienus, who really respected him, to rebuild an abandoned settlement in Campania.
The city of philosophers.
Platonopolis, that was the name. He wanted to rebuild it and have the inhabitants live strictly according to the laws of Plato. No private property, philosopher kings, total rationality.
That sounds like a recipe for a very quiet, but very argument-heavy disaster.
Perhaps. We'll never know. The imperial subsidy was never granted. Porphyry doesn't say why, but you have to assume court intrigue got in the way. People likely realized that a city full of philosophers probably doesn't pay much in taxes.
So no Platonopolis. But we did get the books.
Huh.
We got the Enneads. But as you hinted earlier, the writing process was chaotic.
Chaotic is an understatement. For one, Plotinus didn't even start writing until he was 50, and by that time his eyesight was terrible.
So he literally couldn't see what he was writing.
Barely. And he refused to reread his own work. He found the process of revision tedious and physically painful for his eyes, so he would just write, pouring his thoughts out. Porphyry tells us his handwriting was atrocious. He didn't separate words. He didn't care about spelling.
He was basically just channeling.
He was. Porphyry said it looked like he was copying from a book that existed only in his mind. He would work out the entire argument in his head, then sit down and just transcribe it. But because he refused to edit, the whole task fell to Porphyry to organize this mess of notes.
So we owe a huge debt to Porphyry. Without him, we just have a pile of unreadable scrolls with run-on sentences.
Absolutely. Porphyry is the one who grouped the treatises into sets of 9, hence the name Enneads, which means the nines. He tried to arrange them by topic, starting with ethics and moving all the way up to the universe and the divine.
Okay, so that's the man, the reluctant biographer, the failed soldier, the messy writer. Now let's get into the meat of it. The ideas. We need to talk about his architecture of reality.
This is the core of Neoplatonism. Plotinus describes this hierarchy of reality. It's often called the Three Hypostases, or the three underlying realities.
And at the very, very top, we have the One.
The One, or touhen in Greek.
Let's try to take this apart, because it's the hardest concept to grasp. Is the One God? Like, is it a personality?
No, and this is probably the most critical distinction to make right away. The One is not a person. It's not a being in the way we think of beings. It doesn't have a beard. It doesn't get angry. It doesn't choose favorites.
But what is it, if it's not a thing?
Plotinus says it is the supreme, totally transcendent source. It contains no division, no multiplicity. It is, and this is the key phrase, beyond being and non-being.
Beyond being. That breaks my brain a little bit. It sounds a lot like nothing.
It's meant to break your brain. Plotinus uses what we now call apophatic theology, which basically means you can't describe the One by what it is, because language immediately limits it. If you say the One is good, you're implying there's a quality called goodness that is somehow separate from the One.
Oh, okay. So you can only describe it by what it is not.
Exactly. It is not finite. It is not divided. It is not moving. It is sheer potentiality.
Potentiality.
Think of it like white light. White light looks simple, right? It looks like one thing. But if you pass it through a prism, you see that it contains every color in the spectrum. The One is that white light. It contains the potential for everything, but it hasn't been divided into things yet.
Okay. But does it think? Does it know that it's the One?
Plotinus says no.
It doesn't think.
Yeah.
That seems very counterintuitive for a supreme God.
But think about it. If it thought, there would be a duality. There would have to be the thinker and the thought.
That's two things.
That's two things. The One is unity, pure simplicity. So it has to be above thought. It doesn't need to think because it already possesses everything.
So it's just there. Pure potential.
Yes.
So if the One is just sitting there, not thinking, not planning, how do we get us? How do we get coffee cups and podcasts and traffic jams? Why didn't it just stay one?
That brings us to the second concept, which is the mechanism of the entire universe. Emanation.
The overflow.
Right, really. Host. Imagine the sun.
Okay, picturing the sun.
Does the sun decide to shine? Does it wake up in the morning and say, I think I'll make some light today?
No, it just burns. That's its nature. It can't not shine.
And by burning, it gives off light. It emanates light naturally, indiscriminately. And importantly, does the sun lose anything by shining? Does it get smaller because the light leaves it?
Well, in modern physics, yes, it's losing mass. But for the sake of the ancient metaphor.
For the sake of the ancient metaphor, no. The sun remains the sun. The light is an overflow of its perfection. This is emanation. The One is so perfect, so full of reality, that it necessarily overflows.
So the universe isn't a construction project. It's not a job performed by a creator god who has a blueprint and a schedule.
No, it's a necessary side effect of the one's existence. The multiple must exist because the simple exists.
That is a beautiful image. It's less like a carpenter building a table and more like a flower producing a scent. The flower doesn't work to make the scent just happens because the flower is there.
Or a mirror reflection. The object doesn't change just because it's reflected in a mirror, but the reflection exists because the object exists.
Okay, so the one overflows. What does it overflow into? What's the next level down the ladder?
The first emanation is Nous.
Nous. N-O-U-S, which translates to intellect.
Divine mind or intellect, yes. If the one is the source of the sun's light, Nous is the light itself. This is where being actually happens. This is where Plato's forms exist. All the perfect ideas of justice, beauty, truth, mathematics, they all live in Nous.
So Nous is kind of like the blueprint for the entire universe.
Yes, but a living blueprint. It's not static. It contemplates the one. It looks back at its source. And from this contemplation, it overflows again.
And that second overflow is?
The soul. Or the world soul.
Okay, we're getting closer to home now.
We are. The soul acts as the bridge. It's the active agent in all this. The soul looks up at the intellect and sees the forms, the perfect ideas, and then it looks down and wants to express them. It wants to replicate them.
And wants to paint the picture.
Exactly. The soul generates nature. It generates time. It generates the physical universe to give a form to the ideas it sees in the Nous.
And finally, at the very bottom of the ladder, where the light fades out.
That is matter.
The bottom rung.
The least perfected level. It is the darkness where the light finally dies out. But, and here is where he always surprises you, Plotinus asserts that matter is still ultimately divine.
Why? If it's the darkness.
Because it still derives from the one. Even the shadow is connected to the object that casts it. So the physical world isn't evil in itself, as some other sects believed. It's just the furthest point away from the source. It's the dimmest possible light.
So we have this cascade. The one emanates intellect. Intellect emanates soul. Soul emanates nature and matter. It's like a waterfall of reality.
A waterfall where the top never, ever runs dry.
This brings us to the big question for everyone listening. If we are walking around in this dimmest light, this physical world, what are we? Are we the shadow or are we the light?
And that is the central question of Section 3, the true human.
Because I have to say, I feel like I'm my body. I feel like I'm this thing that gets hungry and tired and has back pain.
And Plotinus would say, you are mistaken. And that mistake is the source of all your suffering.
Ouch.
He distinguishes between what he calls the couplement, which is the composite of the body, and the lower soul that manages the body's functions, and the true human.
And who is the true human?
The true human is that higher incorporeal capacity of the soul. Plotinus argues that our soul didn't actually fully descend into the body.
Wait, what?
There is a part of us that never left the level of the intellect.
So wait a minute. You're saying part of me is still up there, so to speak?
Exactly.
Okay.
There is a part of you that is eternally contemplating the one right now as we speak. We just aren't aware of it because we are so distracted by the sensory noise of the body. We're focused on the traffic jam, not the eternal calm.
So I'm essentially a dual citizen. I'm living here in the physical world, but my true self is hanging out in the divine mind.
Yes. And realizing this is the key to his whole definition of happiness, or eudaimonia.
And this is where it gets really interesting for modern mental health, I think, because we usually define happiness as things going well. You know, I got the promotion, I'm healthy, the sun is shining.
Right. It's based on external circumstances. Plotinus argues that if your happiness depends on external circumstances, you can never be truly happy.
Because circumstances always change.
Exactly. If you need health to be happy, you will live in constant anxiety about getting sick. If you need money, you will fear poverty. Plotinus says true happiness has to be self-sufficient. It must be invulnerable.
So what is true happiness for him then?
It is identifying with the true human. It is shifting your focus from the outer shadow to the inner light.
He makes a really provocative argument about this, doesn't he? He uses the example of a man being tortured.
He does. It's a classic philosophical test case and a very difficult one for most people to swallow. Can a man be happy while he is being physically tortured?
And most of us would say, absolutely not. That's absurd.
Plotinus says yes.
Walk me through that.
You need to...
I don't get it.
Yeah.
How can you be happy when you're screaming in pain?
He argues that the true self is not the thing being tortured. The body is in pain, yes. The animal nature, the couplement, is in distress. But the higher soul, the true human, remains untouched.
So it's like an observer.
It's observing the pain, but it is not in the pain. It is still contemplating the good, the one.
That is That is hardcore.
Hmm.
It sounds a bit like Stoicism, but amplified.
It is very close to Stoicism, but there's a really interesting nuance. The Stoics worried that if you were asleep or mentally incapacitated or senile, you couldn't be happy because you couldn't use your reason. You needed your conscious mind to be working.
And Plotinus, what did he think?
Plotinus says, no, that's wrong, because the soul doesn't sleep. The soul doesn't exist in time. It is always active, always contemplating, even if you, your lower consciousness, aren't aware of it.
So a person in a coma or someone with dementia?
They still have a true human inside them that is perfectly happy, connected to the one.
That is a surprisingly tender idea, actually, that the dignity of the person remains even when the body or the conscious mind fails.
It is. It's the ultimate form of resilience. Happiness for him is a flight from this world's ways. The focus is set always and only inward.
So happiness isn't something you achieve, it's something you remember you already have.
Exactly. You don't have to build the fortress, you just have to retreat into it.
But Plotinus doesn't just want us to think about this fortress intellectually. He wants us to actually experience the source of it. And that brings us to section 4, Gnosis.
And gnosis, the Greek word for union or oneness.
And this is where we leave the lecture hall and enter the monastery, so to speak.
It is. The goal of existence isn't just to be a good person or to understand the chart of the universe. The ultimate goal is to return to the one, to merge with the source.
How do you do that? I mean, if the one is beyond thought, you can't think your way there. You can't just logic your way to God.
You can't. That's the point. You have to strip away thought. Plotinus describes a process of reversing consciousness. It's a method of subtraction.
Subtraction.
Yes. First, you have to ignore the senses, you tune out the physical world. Then you have to ignore the emotions. Then, and this is the really hard part, you have to ignore the intellect. You have to stop thinking about justice or beauty or any of the forms.
You have to become a blank slate.
A tabula rasa. You have to strip away your ego. You have to stop being you. You have to create a space of pure, profound silence.
And then what happens?
If you are prepared, the one fills that silence. And we have an eyewitness account of this from Porphyry. He says that during the 6 years he was with Plotinus, he saw his master achieve this ecstatic state 4 times.
4 times in 6 years. So it's not like something he did every Tuesday morning.
It is incredibly rare. Porphyry says he only achieved it once himself when he was 68 years old. It's a fleeting, ecstatic, transformative experience.
And how did they describe it? What does it feel like?
The flight of the alone to the alone, that's the famous phrase. It's not seeing the divine like you're looking at a painting. It is becoming the divine. The distinction between the seer and the seen completely vanishes. You realize that you and the one are, in the deepest sense, not separate.
That sounds incredibly similar to Eastern traditions. Nirvana, samadhi.
The parallels are undeniable. Remember, his whole desire to travel to India. Even though that expedition failed, his philosophical destination was very, very similar. The method of negation, saying, I am not this, I'm not that, until only the real remains, is classic Advaita Vedanta. And it's classic Plotinus.
It's just fascinating that he reached this conclusion using Greek logic as his starting point. He didn't just meditate under a tree. He argued his way to the very edge of logic, and then he jumped.
That's the beauty of Neoplatonism. It's a kind of rational mysticism. It builds a ladder of logic, climb by climb, until you run out of rungs, and then you have to fly.
Now, you'd think a guy who thought the world was a shadow and wanted to merge with the Vol, one would get along with, everyone else who had spiritual vibes. But Plotinus wasn't living in a bubble. He had rivals. Let's talk about section 5, Plotinus versus the critics.
He had 2 main targets in his writing, the Gnostics and the astrologers. And these disputes tell us a lot about his character and his philosophy.
Okay, let's start with the Gnostics, because on the surface, they sound like they should be best friends. Gnostics believed the material world was a trap, a prison. Plotinus refused to have his portrait painted because he disliked his body. Don't they agree?
You would absolutely think so, but Plotinus wrote a specific tract called Against the Gnostics, and he did not hold back. He was furious with them.
So what was the beef? Where did they disagree?
It comes down to why the world is the way it is. The Gnostics believed the material world was created by a flawed or even evil deity. They called him the demiurge. They thought the world was a mistake, a prison designed to trap souls and keep them from the true God.
So they hated the universe.
They did. They viewed it with resentment and contempt.
And Plotinus.
Plotinus, as we've discussed, believed the world was an emanation of the one, an overflow of perfection. So while it is the lowest level, it is still the best possible image of the divine. He looked at the stars, the order of nature, the seasons, and he saw beauty. He saw the one reflecting in the water.
So Gnostics said, this place is a hellhole built by a demon. And Plotinus said, no, this place is a fading but still beautiful painting of a masterpiece.
Exactly. He accused the Gnostics of arrogance. He said, you think you alone are sons of God and that the stars and the heavens are nothing. He found it deeply disrespectful to the cosmos. He thought you should appreciate the beauty of the shadow even while knowing it's a shadow.
He also attacked their style, didn't he?
He hated their jargon. The Gnostics had these really complicated mythologies with secret passwords, magic words, and these elaborate hierarchies of demons and angels. Plotinus thought this was all just senseless jargon. He believed true spirituality was simple and universal, not some secret club where you needed a code book to get in.
Okay, and what about the astrologers? Causal astrology was huge back then. I mean, everybody believed the stars controlled your fate.
And Plotinus pushed back hard on this too. He argued specifically against causal astrology.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning the idea that the position of Mars causes you to be angry or that Venus causes you to fall in love.
And why did he reject that?
Two main reasons. First, logic. If the stars cause everything, then the universe is irrational. Why would a star, which Plotinus viewed as a divine ensouled being, cause someone to be a thief or a murderer? It attributes moral depravity to the gods.
It makes the gods accomplices to the crime.
Exactly. And the second reason was free will, or more accurately, the freedom of the soul. If the stars are driving the bus, then we're just puppets. Plotinus insisted that the soul is free. It comes from the one. It cannot be enslaved by a rock floating in the sky.
But he didn't dismiss astrology entirely, did he?
No, he was a man of his time. He believed the stars were ensouled and moved in harmony with the universe. But he viewed them as signs, like writing on a wall. They might predict the future because everything is interconnected, like a single organism, but they don't cause it.
That's a really crucial distinction. It's like a flock of birds predicting a storm. The birds don't cause the rain, but if you see them, you know rain is probably coming.
Precisely. It preserves the connectivity of the cosmos without destroying human responsibility.
So we've seen his life, his system, his practice, and his fights. Now we come to the end of his life. Section 6. The death and legacy.
Plotinus died in 270 CE. He was about 66 years old. He withdrew to an estate in Campania, likely suffering from a very painful illness. Some accounts suggest it was leprosy, others a throat infection.
And he was alone.
Mostly. His circle had dispersed by then. Porphyry was away in Sicily dealing with his own suicidal depression. Plotinus had actually sent him there to recover. So we have to rely on another student, Eustochius, for the final moments.
And his last words are legendary.
They are. Eustochius arrived late. Plotinus said, I have been waiting for you. And then he said, try to raise the divine in yourselves to the divine in the all.
Raise the divine in yourselves to the divine in the all. That is a mic drop.
It summarizes his entire philosophy in one single sentence. It's not about going somewhere else. It's about tuning your frequency to the frequency of the universe.
And then there's this snake.
Yes, the snake. Eustochius recorded that at the exact moment Plotinus took his last breath, a snake that had been sleeping under his bed crept out and slipped away through a hole in the wall.
You can't write that stuff. It's just symbolic perfection. The shedding of the skin, the soul slipping away from the body.
It fits the mythos perfectly.
Yeah.
The shadow is left behind and the life moves on.
So the man dies.
Huh.
But the ideas, they just exploded.
The ripple effect is massive. You almost can't overstate it. Plotinus is like the operating system running in the background of Western spirituality for the next 1,000 years.
Okay, let's trace it. Christianity, for starters.
Huge. St. Augustine. Augustine was a brilliant man, but he was stuck. He couldn't conceive of a god that wasn't a physical object. He was a Manichaean at the time. Then he read the books of the Platonists, which were Latin translations of Plotinus. It gave him the intellectual framework to understand a non-material God. It allowed him to understand God as light, as spirit. The whole Christian concept of the soul and the kingdom of heaven being an other world of perfection that owes a massive debt to Plotinus.
It's so strange to think that a guy who never mentions Jesus influenced Christianity so much.
Well, Bertrand Russell famously said that to the Christian, the other world was the kingdom of heaven. To Plotinus, it was the eternal world of ideas. Christian theologians just sort of combine the two.
And what about in Islam?
Just as significant, and this is a great historical mix-up, when Greek texts were translated into Arabic during the Islamic Golden Age, parts of the Enneads were translated. But, and they were mislabeled as the theology of Aristotle.
Wait, so they thought they were reading Aristotle this whole time?
Yes. For centuries, major Islamic philosophers like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and Avicenna thought they were reading Aristotle, but they were actually reading Plotinus.
That is a massive error.
A very fruitful error, though. It meant that Islamic philosophy absorbed all this Neoplatonic mysticism. It influenced Ismaili thought, Persian philosophy, the Fatimid state. The idea of emanation fits very, very well with Islamic mysticism or Sufism.
And then the Renaissance.
Marsilio Ficino. He translates Plotinus into Latin in the 15th century. The Florentine Academy wanted to reconcile Plato with Christianity, and Plotinus was the key. Artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli were breathing this Neoplatonic air.
Oh, so in what way?
The idea that physical beauty is a ladder to divine beauty. When you see a Renaissance painting of a beautiful figure, it's not just supposed to be a pretty body. It's supposed to remind you of the divine form of beauty that exists in the intellect. That's pure Plotinus.
And finally, that connection back to India.
As we touched on, modern scholars and figures like Kumar Swami have drawn direct lines between him and Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism, the idea that Atman, the individual self, is Brahman, the universal reality. Plotinus never made it to India, but his mind went to the exact same place.
It really shows that there's a universal human longing there. Whether you're in Lycopolis, Rome, or Varanasi, people are looking for the same source.
And trying to find a way to escape the suffering of the shadow world.
So let's bring it all home. We've covered a lot. The one, the emanation, the true human.
We have.
What's the main takeaway for you when you step back from all the charts and the Greek terms?
For me, it's the definition of the self. Plotinus tells us that we are not small. We feel small. We feel vulnerable to the economy, to sickness, to the opinions of others. But he insists that those things are just waves hitting a rock. The rock, the true human, is ancient, indestructible, and divine. It's an incredibly dignified way to view human life.
It changes the stakes. You aren't fighting for happiness, you are uncovering it.
Exactly.
I want to leave the listener with a thought, something to chew on. You mentioned earlier that the one is sheer potentiality that overflows. It doesn't work to create. It just creates by being.
Yes.
It emanates. So if the true human inside us is connected to that, what does that mean for our own creativity?
That is the provocative question, isn't it?
We often think of creativity as effort. We struggle, we build, we strain, but Plotinus suggests that true creation is an overflow. Are we really creating things? Or when we're at our best, in that flow state, are we simply allowing the one to emanate through us?
Are we the makers, or are we just the open window?
That's something to think about the next time you're trying to force a solution. Maybe the answer isn't to push harder, but to clear the blockage and just let the light through.
Turn the gaze inward.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
My pleasure.
See you next time.